Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Bulwarg Disclosure Podcast. We've got a really exciting guest with us here today. You may know him from books like Caesar's Messiah. We've got Joe Atwill here on the podcast with us today. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here, Noah.
So, like I mentioned, Joe is an author, a researcher. I've been aware of his work for quite some time. One of the pieces I read a long time ago that really impacted me a lot and awoke me to some of the, really important concepts was the manufacturing the deadhead article that you did.
Right.
And I didn't even realize until refreshing myself on some of your work in the past couple of weeks that that was your article, you and Jan Irvin, obviously, but I totally forgot that that was even your piece, the
Yeah,
manufacturing the
yeah,
deadhead.
that was actually an article that was written about how the Grateful Dead. That was the general focus of the article. Um, had been created and by uh, basically sort of the oligarchs. We can talk about who they are, but they were an artificial cultural entity, and they were there to debase culture. I mean, this was a long-standing process to basically attack ethnicity and family. And people are always surprised about this concept for some reason, that an attack on ethnicity and family, who would benefit from such a thing? But
Mhm.
if you look at the world from the oligarchs' perspective, you can see why you want to break those things apart, because to create isolated people who without ethnicity and without family, these are the people that are easy to control. These are the people that need government. And these are also the people who cannot actually rebel, because, an ethnicity can rebel. I mean, it has power, it has the ability to say no. Families produce ethnicity in general. And so this is why, very simply, why the oligarchs wanted to destroy them. And they have for well over 100 years. In 1919, uh, during the period of time when the Hungarian Republic was taken over by Bolsheviks, Gregor Luchas and Bela Kun, those aren't their real names, of course, um, they, um, they instituted pedagogical techniques immediately to basically break apart family and promote pornography. And so this was in 1919, when the Hungarian Soviet was overthrown and the population was outraged, by these activities. Luchas went then to Germany, where he started the Frankfurt School. He was very instrumental in the Frankfurt School, which then basically produced cultural Marxism. They took the position that, we can't really count on a proletariat revolution. Marx seems to have been incorrect in this, but we can, by a long march through the institutions, create the same kind of control over society that we want. And so this was then, the Frankfurt School then came to the United States. You have the authoritarian personality, which is something everyone should be aware of. It's a very important influence in our culture. And at the conclusion of it, in chapter 23, it just outright says we're going to use eros as a way to basically bring about the social change that we want. So then this organization is swept up into the Macy Conference.
Mhm.
The authoritarian personality is circulated there. The authors Adorno and Horkheimer are at the Cybernetic Conference.
Mhm.
And that conference then morphs into what then became called MK Ultra. And from there, you have further the CIA. You have all these different agencies spread out. But all of this is just really about two things. It's about um, trying to understand how culture operates, and how to destroy it, how to produce the single mom and the pornographic male. I
Mhm.
use those expressions to talk about what is left of the human beings after the process has been completed. and it was done for the express purpose of shattering, our culture. So that's the kind of with manufacturing the deadhead. We're just trying to get these ideas out that when you looked at the original sort of the people who really were generating the counterculture in the popular sense, if you looked in their background, you found secret societies, the Bohemian Grove, Freemasonry, and so you could actually start to assemble the organization through time. As you worked out these connections, and you could see how artificial it was. Dave McGowan did a great research job in Laurel Canyon, and he pointed out that so many of the people in the Laurel Canyon scene who became famous for rock and roll were the sons and daughters of military intelligence individuals. Far greater than it could have been something of circumstance. And then when you combine that with the research that we did in terms of the Grateful Dead, you could see that it was just this overall idea to implement the conclusion of the authoritarian personality.
Right.
And just so people understand it, the authoritarian personality is pseudoscience that was actually commissioned by the American Jewish Committee, and with the idea of
was that the precursor to the ADL, or am I thinking of a different group?
Well, they're all sort of linked together, APAC, ADL, yeah, but no, the American Jewish Committee was separate from that, but the individuals all, through time, they inhabited the different organizations. But it was clearly it was a pseudoscience. The authoritarian personality was claiming that it could determine through different tests the propensity for fascism, and some of these the traits were the authoritarian, meaning any kind of authority for a father or male, ethnocentrism, where if you were too focused on your ethnicity, this was also neurotic and was a precursor to fascism. And what is really just comical in a way is that these individuals virtually were all Jewish, and none of these, and the psychological testing was all against Europeans to determine fascism propensity. But you could apply, for example, if you went to Israel today and gave these tests, you'd produce the most fascistic, personality types imaginable. So it really was, in my opinion, it was just a way to create a kind of, a way of talking about the mind of the European, that would always lead to a lack of self-esteem, and to an acceptance of the destruction of the ethnicity, because that was really certainly in the minds of most of the sort of Jewish social engineers at the end of World War II. I mean, if you've ever read the Morgenthau Plan, for example, you can see it was very overt. They wanted to basically starve and genocide the German people, and so these things were influences, in this process, in the process of the production of the counterculture. I mean, obviously, the counterculture is a vast event, and there's more than one or two things involved with it, but certainly in terms of the media acceptance and promotion of it, and the bringing about its really powerful transition of Americans and Europeans. It was simply this program in effect. I mean, if you look at Woodstock, the 3 days which defined a generation, they say, I mean, this was kind of the accumulation of, or a high point of that process. They, put everyone on LSD. They had this music, which was very sexualized and critical of European culture, and you had this kind of group power for all of these individuals were all packed in. And if you just imagine someone who was in that event, what kind of mentality they would bring out of it, what would they would leave with. Well, they had been conditioned in a very strong way, particularly if they were on LSD.
Mm-hmm.
And I have friends who actually attended the event. I know them. This was my generation, so I have seen the effect of it, and
Right.
um, it was all basically a way of bringing about an end of that identity that they had of being kind of a European, culturally, influenced individual.
Yeah.
And if you look at the songs, the lyrics, like "Who Are You" by the Who, or David Bowie, don't know if you're a boy or a girl. They're so often they're talking about there's just something wrong with yourself, your identity, and there's this new personality that you can emerge to.
Mhm.
It's more peaceful, it's more sexualized.
Well,
all these.
that harkens back to some of the MK Ultra literature talking about, transforming people, kind of this tabula rasa phrase, wiping to a blank slate to imprint a new personality on these people. And aside from just the ethnic implications that you're talking about, with some of this, when you look in retrospect, I think people tend to forget that the things that were going on around the time that this was all getting introduced, and Woodstock and Laurel Canyon scene and things like that, the social upheaval and the anti-war movements and the legitimate counterculture movements that were happening. Think about all the power and organizational capacity that was diverted from legitimate complaints or legitimate opposition, when something like all the people that are out in Woodstock, or travel, move to the Haight-Ashbury and are stoned out on acid, all that organizational capacity within the youth movements back then was just completely neutralized. And the some of the overt nature that you've been talking about, that they kind of talk, whether it's the chapter 23 of the authoritarian personality, or Huxley, who is kind of, Aldous Huxley, who's looked at as kind of this counterculture hero sort of person. Well, no, he was spelling out in Brave New World what they were going to do. He wasn't forewarning us. He was telling,
Exactly.
he was
Yeah.
saying eventually narco-hypnosis and infantilization is going to be a more powerful tool of the oligarchs for control than bullets and war. Even the Grateful Dead, it's in their lyrics. In US Blues, they say, what's the lyrics? Uncle Sam, that's who I am, been hiding out in a rock and roll band.
Yeah, very clear. With Huxley, I think again, this is just sort of the my trajectory, and I think it's a coherent one.
Mhm.
And I would say that his use of the term "Brave New World" is critical, because he's using a phrase from Shakespeare, from the play The Tempest. And
Mhm.
if people are interested, you just type my last name Atwill in The Tempest into Google, and my analysis of The Tempest will come up. That's where the expression comes from. And I show that the play is not, as like Huxley presents himself as a humanist. It's actually very racist, and describes what I would say is the process we're experiencing right now. The play The Tempest, oddly enough, is extremely important to understand our modern world, because they it describes basically a new world order, and uses the expression "the brave new world" that will have these strange creatures within it.
Mhm.
Um, so the the play is as any Shakespearean scholar would know, is based on the book of Isaiah. And at the beginning of the play, the concept, the tempest, the character Ariel, and and vignettes from the play, like the people waking up and not being able to. They think they've been eating and drinking, but in fact they've been in a dream. I mean, these are all concepts that are actually taken right out of the book of Isaiah, and it's really well understood. But if you read the article I wrote, you'll see that Shakespearean scholars heretofore have missed the fact that actually the typology, the linking to Isaiah, goes far further into the book of Isaiah. And you get into the area where you have the genocide of the Gentiles, and you have a post apocalyptic world where there's only basically the Jewish Israelites would be alive in this desolate world after the apocalypse that Isaiah envisions, Isaiah 50, 51, if people are curious. But the typology I show, the links are really clear cut, particularly in the concept of knowing that the first part of the play is all about the book of Isaiah. When I show that it's a little more opaque, but nevertheless the links are there, and you can see that when you get into the play, The Tempest, what the author is talking about with Brave New World is the author is talking about this post-apocalyptic world that where the Gentiles have basically been put to sleep, have been put into this dream trance, which is
Oh, wow.
actually that's really what the play is about. And then you can understand now, like, why would the Bohemian Grove, have the owl as its symbol? What is this for? It's because of the play. You can see that they understand that the owl is the symbol of the post apocalyptic world, the world that emerges after the destruction of the Christian world has occurred. So it's that, and then I would, as long as I'm mentioning literature, excuse me, I would also point out that the other person who's well known for the expression would be Rudyard Kipling. He used when the Brave New World begins in one of his poems, The Gods of the Copybook Headings, which is again describes an apocalypse. He's using the expression in the same way that Shakespeare did. And incredibly, Kipling wrote a poem which was secret, but had been discovered, like 10 years ago, I think, maybe a little bit longer. But anyway, it's called The Burden of Jerusalem. And I would hope all of your listeners would use Google and bring it up, because you can see that it's the most Zionist and genocidal poem imaginable. I mean, he talks about how the Gentiles will have to bear the weight of unending hate of the Jews. He actually uses these expressions. It's very, very violent and very racist. Kipling was I would call a lifetime actor. He's someone who kind of presents himself as a Gentile, but you don't have to look too far into him to see that really he's representing, the Old Testament, not the New Testament.
Sure.
But anyway, what's interesting about the poem and important is that the poem was actually really only read and for Winston Churchill and FDR. These are the two people who actually had the poem and read it and knew about it. And their letters that they correspond with one another talking about the poem, how it had to be kept secret, and about how wonderful the message of Gentile genocide is, they actually articulate it in those letters. So I would hope everyone, who's interested in like this long trajectory of analysis, if you look at my work, you go to Caesar's Messiah, where you kind of get the first century themes understood, and then you get into Shakespeare, where you see the response to this vicious kind of comedy that exists inside the Gospels. But now, once you understand Shakespeare, you can understand Kipling and Huxley. You can see exactly where they're coming from, the genocide that they are promoting. The Burden of Jerusalem is a poem that every single American should have a strong opinion regarding, and we should also look at the letters between FDR and Churchill, who are both Freemasons, of course, to see what is really in back of our world, because when you get to things like World War I and World War II, there's so many inexplicable things going on. You wonder, well, like World War I, for heaven's sakes, why would it even exist? But when you look at who is actually in charge of Germany and in charge of Britain, you can understand that, well, first of all, the Kaiser and the King of Britain, they're first cousins. They're both grandsons of Victoria, the Queen Bee of Freemasonry. And then you come to the conclusion I believe, which is that our political class is artificial. It has lied itself into existence. They are lifetime actors. They have allegiance into the program that you can see in the Tempest, in the Burden of Jerusalem, and in the authoritarian personality. This is their real allegiance. They aren't really trying to actually work for the good of kind of European culture. That is the target. That is their target. So then when you look at World War I, in my opinion, you just have a great clarification. You can see that what happened is the political class was taken over on both sides of the dialectic, the
Hmm.
war, and
Hmm.
then the populations were run into each other to
Hmm.
reduce population. So this is really what I'm afraid we're living in,
Yeah.
is a program wherein there is just these long-standing structures to reduce our population. Um, and the group that's doing this, I call them like a Judeo-Masonic. And I want to clarify, I'm not talking about the Jewish people any more than if I talk about the mafia. I'm talking about the Sicilians. I'm talking about an elite class of Zionist oligarchs that have political control, that work with what I call the Masonic, but it isn't just Freemasonry, and it's not all Freemasons. It would only be a
Hmm.
small controlling group, which now has branched out. You have, Bohemian Grove, CIA. I mean, they morph the names that they use in terms of the control organizations. So I just use that expression because it's handy. People I think can kind of understand that these are secret societies. They are relating, when they talk about the New World Order, to a post-Christian world. You see, you might say, well, they're not talking about me. I'm not a practicing Christian. They're
Hmm.
talking about European culture. They want to supersede that culture with theirs, and that's really the process that's going on now.
Yeah.
When you look at the high rates of autism, and what you're really seeing is basically the delta and epsilon class that Huxley had talked about
Hmm.
being manufactured through toxicity.
The
And
worker class kind of.
yeah, well, and below, I mean, the
Hmm.
sex slaves, and just and incapable of rebellion because of stupidity. They don't
Hmm.
have the mental power. And I'll just conclude this rant by pointing out that when people ask me, they go, "Well, what to do?" I say, "Well, the first thing is become healthy. This is the first thing you must do, and you do that by stop poisoning yourself with the toxic foods, the vaccines, pseudo medicines, I mean, statin drugs, things like this. They have just so many ways to reduce our mental power, and our biological power. And then the other thing is, and I wanted to throw in a little praise for you. We have to learn to think better. And so that's why, first step is trying to open up to a little more independent sources of information and views. And so I hope your show becomes extremely popular and replaces Fox News and CNN and those structures of the oligarchs. So
Yeah, we can only hope. And these are all such a nuanced and complicated topics, and they all seem to kind of overlap with each other, you know. Before we get too much deeper into, the things we're talking about now, some of these things we're talking about social engineering and MK Ultra, conditioning and degeneration of society and stuff, to some people probably come off as pearl clutching Christian fundamentalist whinging, and I think it's important to go ahead and get it out of the way that you are by no means a Christian or a Christian fundamentalist. You actually wrote a book that contests the entirety of the Christian religion itself and argues that Christ, as a Messiah and even as a historical figure, was an invention of kind of this Roman oligarchy, the Flavians, to quell what was essentially like kind of an uprising and revolt by presenting a religion wherein this messianic arc had already completed, which has
yeah.
quite a lot of parallels to the other things we're talking about right now,
Well, I
psychedelic proliferation, it all kind of overlaps.
100%. I mean, I wrote Caesar's Messiah, and I was very I wasn't thrilled about some of the implications of it, but I
Mhm.
had done the analysis, and I'd shared it with some academics, and they, pressured me and basically into publishing it. And so out it came. I mean, it it is at this point, I think, useful because it creates skepticism of government narrative.
Mhm.
When you understand that the Gospels were produced by the imperial court and had a political purpose, and are not in any way attempting to take us to a brave new world, but
Mhm.
rather the opposite. And in fact, this is exactly what occurs with Christianity, because it became the religious veneer for the feudal system,
Right.
which was a slave system, and which completely put out the intellectual light of Europe. Rome in the first century was on the brink of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it literally was, if it had continued on, it's the path that it was on technologically, it would have been where we got to in like the 19th and 20th century. That's how advanced they were. This was completely destroyed by the oligarchs. They realized that the common person should not have access to mathematics and engineering because it made him powerful. And so in the feudal system, Christianity was, basically ruled by the Pope, God's emissary. The government bureaucracy was underneath him, but the serf had the instructions that they had to obey, because this was what would lead them ultimately to heaven, and
Mhm.
this was a religious position, that God had put them there, and the oligarchs where they were, and this was,
Mhm.
we should just accept it.
Pay
Um,
unto Caesar, and at the end
and
of your life, you'll have this worker's
yeah,
paradise kind of thing.
yeah, and kind of just as an example of how powerful the destruction of the European intellect was. Um, we had completely lost all of the intellectual progress of the Greek intellectuals, Socrates, Aristotle. All of that was gone. Archimedes, and it, when it came back to Europe through the Crusades, and what occurred was Arabic copies of the profound Greek intellectual achievements were brought back and translated. And they were so kind of out of normal thinking that the university people who obtained them, because they only studied God, they had two courses. There was theology, which was the study of God, and biology, which was the study of God's handiwork. And they looked at this stuff and they said, well, what is this? So they developed a new department, which they called humanity, because they were now studying the works of man. And so this is where the term humanity department comes from. And it's very appropriate and very telling, because it shows that the human intellect, the European intellectual world, had been extinguished. And unfortunately, we're still suffering from this. The European people are still, in my opinion, um, we have been so influenced for so long by oligarchic social control,
Mhm.
that the current version, the MK Ultra authoritarian personality, mass media, Facebook, this is just building upon structures that we been put into us, of kind of not being skeptical in terms of government claims, government narratives. In other words, the traditions are very long standing with us. And so to survive, because clearly now the technology exists for the oligarchs to dramatically reduce population, um, we have to up our game. The citizens have to learn to think more clearly, and we need, first of all, we need to be more skeptical, because
Mhm.
if we don't simply accept things like the story of an October 7th, the Hamas invasion, if that story is given to us and we are skeptical, then what will occur is we will say, well, there are so many inexplicable things about the story we've been given.
Mhm.
And I think the thing that we need to do is try to develop an interpretive framework of the event that is at least coherent.
Mhm.
To do this, we need to look at the events and try to parse them and see, well, what is possible, what is real. You can do this with 911 as another one, which,
Of course.
like a clear-minded skepticism of the narrative brings about, this is too inexplicable. The building falls at free fall speed. It's steel framed, it's symmetrical collapse. These are not attributes that can ever be found except in controlled demolition.
Mhm.
And since there are three attributes which would never be found naturally, so to speak, it couldn't be anything other than controlled demolition. That would be a way of how reason and logic gets you to an interpretive framework that's at least without the inexplicable. On October the 7th, you have the breaching of the Israeli security wall.
The most fortified, supposedly the most,
Well, the
advanced.
technology, yeah, the Israeli border security is famous for its automation and
Right.
its effectiveness. The company that produces it is called Elbit. It's a joint Israeli and American company. And in 2017, they brought out a video, touting how automated it was, how impossible it was to breach. The landmines, Gatling guns, drones and AI observing every inch. So the idea that these guys just walked through in like 30 different areas is inexplicable. How could this possibly have occurred? Then you have the fact that, well, why don't you release the videos? Right? I mean, it's all videotaped. Just release it so we can actually see what happened. And then finally, I do a podcast in Israel from time to time, and the gentleman I work with there, he pointed out that the comptroller of Israel, the person who's handling the money, he brought an investigation against October 7th. He said, wait a second, we've paid billions of dollars. It's completely automated. You're giving the rationale that there was complacency. We kind of, we just sort of were so successful, we became complacent. Well, I paid for landmines. I paid for automatic Gatling guns. How complacent does a landmine get? So he was very upset. He brought the investigation, and it was shut down on the grounds that it would be detrimental to the war effort if any of the truth got out. So now, what do you have really in terms of their claims? I mean, to me, all that's left really is it's a stand down, and it's done for the purpose of creating a pretext for genocide. Israeli, in this regard, their political class is a psychopath. They care nothing for the lives of other people. They're completely self-centered. They will use violence whenever they seem necessary to get their way, and then they'll lie about everything that they do. This is really what you have, unfortunately, in control of Israel at this point. And so you then have this pretext for genocide, which is very weak. And when there's protests in the U.S., which thank heavens there have been, you get the media standing as one, block against it, and characterizing them as left wing or whatever, some kind of term, anti-Semitic.
Mhm.
And so there we are. You are when skepticism is available, when you have it in your like everyday life and mind, you just don't accept this stuff. You always ask for a interpretive framework that's coherent. So if my book has produced skepticism at all, I'm happy for that.
Yeah. Well, I think that what you're talking about, just the importance of being skeptical of government narratives and what you're being told. Even a broken clock, what they say, like Timothy Leary's famous think for yourself, question authority, I think has never been more important than nowadays. And a person who is skeptically minded will notice things, parallels between, like we're talking about October 7th and 9/11, both, these events that created pretext for these massive, massive unwarranted campaigns in the Middle East. And you have lifetime actors, like you talk about them, like Netanyahu being involved with 9/11, prior to that with the clean break memo, which
Yeah,
essentially detailed is exactly what they needed and wanted
yeah,
to happen to lead to what did eventually transpire. You have his political position prior to October 7th, being brought up on fraud and corruption charges, and one of the most, one of the lowest approval ratings of any prime minister, to my knowledge. Those things are really crazy to me because people are always ready to question the face value, whatever you might call holes in narratives. Everybody knows about Tower 7, and that doesn't make any sense. But the skepticism, I feel like, stops there. And one of the things that really keeps it from going any further, I think, is um, the religious conditioning, that has been done on the Israeli society at the hand of Zionism, which, if you understand anything about its founding, even people like Herzl and the people involved in the founding of Zionism, they were no friends of the Jews. They viewed Judaism as something they could take advantage of and use to deflect criticism of, their further actions. Same in America with the post 9/11 atmosphere of, anti-Muslim rhetoric and all these things. So my question to you, as you talk about this, the uh, disposal of religion, and moving into this new kind of, whatever you want to call it, brave new world, they kind of call it, where this post-religious era, it seems to me that religion is actually, even though it may not still be the most powerful control mechanism, it still has its purpose, especially within specific segments of society. What will they use, in its place, something like, I don't know, like fundamentalist Christianity or Zionism, where people are raised their whole life to view themselves as a victim. Everyone around us wants to kill us, those kind of thing. Doesn't religion still provide a powerful method of control?
Sure, and it's also one that can be used for great good. I mean, um, Zionism, doesn't begin with Herzl. I mean, it had
Right.
been in place since 1840. It was a Freemason project. You can see Palmerston, who was the head Freemason, talking about now is the time for the Jews to return to their homeland in 1840. And then what they did was destroy the influence of Reform Judaism. Now, this is a disaster for humanity because Reform Judaism, people like Abraham Geiger, they had come to the understanding that the Zionist element in Judaism was its greatest flaw and had to be overcome. And they talked about making a Judaism that was for the whole world, that they were going to take the good part of the Hebrew prophets' vision and try to use them in a way that would be inspirational for, an actual more peaceful and more integrated world in terms of not necessarily religion, but just in terms of
Mhm.
of community. So when the Freemasons brought out Zionism, they opposed it absolutely dramatically and powerfully, but they couldn't withstand the money and the political power of the Freemason Zionists, who are not Jews. This group they had the Rothschild family involved and Disraeli, but overall they were just Grandmaster Freemasons who were the ones who set up the original surveys of what they called the Holy Land to determine what it was, because none of them had ever been there, and to see what part of it they needed to take control over. Um, and so then, you have the political version of Zionism with Herzl, who was their employee, for God's sakes. I mean, his nickname that he took during college was Tancred. I won't go into it too far, but I mean, he's linking back to the proto-Zionist Freemasons from the very beginning. They're funding him. His original speeches are basically he's just regurgitating speeches that they'd been given, and then through their funding, they were able to set up the kind of the Zionism that we're familiar with in terms of history with Ben Gurion and these guys. And so it was an artificial project. It wasn't coming from Jewish kind of people, but it was coming from oligarchs who had this grand vision of restoring Israel and the temple, the Freemason goal, basically. So religion has tremendous power, for social control. We can see it in the version of Zionism that the oligarchs produced, the one that we're suffering with now. But we can also see how it could be for the benefit of us, inspirational, leading us, to a little more human in the good sense of the term, way of living that the Reformed Jews had in mind, with Judaism and with the Torah. So, there it is. It is, religion is, it taps into the need for spirituality, but also taps into kind of the inability of the human mind to be quickly rational when, phenomena happens, and, when there's disaster, someone dies that you love. Religion is such a panacea, it helps out so much, that we link to it, we emotionally are, gravitate, and we enable it as something that's powerful inside of us. And then unfortunately, that's the link that the oligarchs can use to lead us around with. Now it's been replaced by, the version they're using now is this wokeism stuff with, they're trying to to combine integration, in with basically, kind of artificial biological thing with transgender, um, to create this brave new world, the deltas and the epsilons. When you think about, how, like the transgender situation, look, I mean, they want the argument to be about civil rights. Does such an individual have civil rights? This is an interesting argument, but it isn't what society needs to be discussing. What we need to talk about is, have they been created through toxicity? You know, we have the situation now where, um, European men have lost 60% of their sperm count since 1950, right? Autism was not even something that was real when I was growing up. In California, the last statistic was 1 in 22 children are suffering from it.
Wow.
I mean, it's just atrocious. So the thing is, when you want to distract the public from that reality, you use the concept of the civil rights of the individual, neurodiversity, or, transphobia, things like this. Well, those are important and interesting arguments, but they're not what's on the table. What's on the table now is, we're going out of existence. The birth rate in the US is just plummeting so fast, it's just catastrophic. And when you have 1 in 30 kids with autism, okay, the other 29 are not fully healthy, obviously.
Mhm.
It all operates along a spectrum. So you've shifted kind of the bell curve of health and intelligence way to the left now. And as I said, you're creating the delta and epsilons with this. And the transgender is just a manifestation of the toxicity that we are all experiencing. You know, like, and in many cases they have, they're making legitimate claims about their biology, but they don't understand, or they don't talk about the fact that that was an attack upon their biology. You see, they don't say, I have, my sexuality is confused. My estrogen level I was born a male, but I identify with women very often. Well, why? What
Mhm.
brought that about? If you don't have that argument and that discussion, all you're going to do is just let anyone who can control the food supply of
Yeah.
of of your people lead you into whatever kind of debased condition of humanity they want,
Mhm.
and they want a debased condition of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. For any listeners who aren't aware, when Joe is referring to delta and epsilon classes, this is obviously a reference to Brave New World Huxley and the lower slave working classes who are kind of, what's the quote from Huxley about producing, a prisoner who isn't even aware that he's in a prison,
Right. Yeah, they're enslaved, and they've been perfectly enslaved because they're not
Mhm.
even aware they've been
Right.
enslaved. And in Brave New World, Huxley sets up 5 castes, 5 classes, with the controllers on top. And then as you work down, you have lower and lower intelligence until you get to the deltas and epsilons, and these are basically a slave class. And this is just a term I'm using to describe the biological destruction that's going on now and why they're doing it. I mean, Noah, if the oligarchs weren't in control of the media, just the fact that we've lost 60% of our sperm and that 1 in 30 kids is autistic, there would be no other news stories. Everything else is, not necessarily irrelevant, but in very, very small levels of importance compared to those things. And yet you never, ever hear those things discussed.
Mhm.
If someone brings it up, whoever is giving a response will just blow it off with a claim like, well, it's just a reaction to the technological world. It's just what we have to put up with for all of our wonderful technology that, is so great to have. Well, we are rapidly on our way to extinction. Sometimes I'm in discussions with people who are woke, to use that expression.
Sure.
And I'll say, what you have to understand is your political philosophy is so incoherent that you don't even have 2 generations left. When you have a political position that doesn't have like a 3rd generation that is possible, then you've fallen off a cliff intellectually, right? This isn't defensible because extinction is not the purpose of the political process. You see,
Mhm.
if that's what it is bringing about, you just have to admit there's something wrong. And so, what wokeism is, it's the oligarch's way of creating a happy face, of giving things like the transgender, the dramatic increase in homosexuality, the autistic, all of the aspects of the physical destruction are being given, kind of references which are defensible in terms of civil rights.
Mhm.
And so they can keep the discussion there. This is a preposterous situation. And the people who really care about these individuals, they talk about
Yeah.
transphobia, homophobia. Look, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to have those charges hurled against me. Go ahead. But please remember that my position is actually coming from love of these
Yeah.
individuals. Me and the people who are bringing up these ideas, we're the ones who are concerned about them. The
Yeah.
people that are just letting, drag queen story hour become part of our culture, they're not interested in any kind of, humanity that is healthy and strong. They're trying to justify and to normalize what are the results of a biologically destructive, structure. So, I'm just again, all of the expressions they have to stop thinking.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitic is very powerful.
Mhm.
Truther, conspiracy
Right.
theorist, transphobe. I mean, go on and on. What these are in terms of thinking, and
Mhm.
they're just designed to stop thought.
Mhm.
That's all they're there for. They just, Holocaust denial. There's another one. We'd like to study the conclusion of World War II in the camps and try to see, what really occurred there. You're into Holocaust denial. It's a term that makes you a ad hominem, a
Mhm.
victim. You can't think about it. Truther, 911.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I just want to digress because I always bring up this. It sort of justifies being a Bible scholar because there's a lot of time spent wasted, as you can imagine. So why did they pick 911? People, it's confusing to people. What was the purpose of all this? Bible scholar should get it immediately because the the date that the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed on the same day of the year on 2 occasions. Now, in fact, this is ridiculous. It's just the Romans claim this because it gave the idea that God was sanctioning, their destruction of the temple. So the Jews celebrate, or they mourn, the destruction of the 2 temples on a particular day. And remember, Hebrew is, right to left, so it would be written 911. Now, it isn't September 11th, but nevertheless, it would actually be written as 911. And so, this would be the reason that they chose that date, and that there was so much foreknowledge of, you've seen all of the different people who seem to be aware of 911 as well.
Right.
This is wise because people understood that would be the date that the new kind of world order would be sort of implemented. And then remember that they chose the first year of the third millennium, 2001, to do this kind of revenge of the destruction of the temple. And that one of the buildings, the building that collapsed, was the Solomon building, which is just a typological
Yeah.
way of representing. So for a Bible scholar, you just look at this and go, oh, yeah, this is no brainer. This is why the date was picked, why they're just representing kind of the revenge and of the change, the new world order. It's all part of the they use typology, and this is why Caesar's Messiah, kind of one of the reasons I'm happy I brought it out. This is the language of the oligarchs. This is how they write their legacy with this language, because they feel that the population is too stupid to see if they seem to be talking about something else. They won't see the real meaning because it's a little abstracted. So it's typology. That's why it's the Solomon building was sufficient to create this typologic linkage, so that the cognoscenti, the people who are in on the thing, they could all laugh and
Mhm.
just see how funny this is, and how meaningful the vengeance is here to the two destructions. And I mean, I think they burned Notre Dame on the day that De Molay was burned to death on the steps of it. I think it was Friday the 11th or something. I mean, it's just an example of that. If you have skepticism and you're paying attention to these events as maybe having symbolic relationships to things in the past, you
Mhm.
get a better understanding, and you end up with explicable and coherent interpretive frameworks, which is
Mhm.
what I would hope we move toward, because we need, as citizens, to up our game, think better, be more skeptical, because they have more technology now than ever, and they're more determined than ever to destroy us.
Well, the method by which they've been able to do so much of this stuff, whether it's what you're talking about, the epsilons and deltas and the, uh, you know, transgenderism, different things of that. Again, we're not assigning a judgment to it, whether it's a good or bad thing. It's just that it has been artificially manufactured, at this point. That's so glaringly obvious. But the method by which they've been able to do it, I think, is just the technologies that they have now that they didn't in the past.
Yeah.
Timothy
Yeah.
Leary talked about in his later, in the 90s, he was huge into technology. He talked about the internet being the LSD of the next generations, and his huge interest in cybernetics and things of that nature. And it's easy for anybody to see, that that's the main way that they promulgate these ideas is via the media and technology. You look out on something like, an app like TikTok or something, and it's just so disturbing and dystopian. You see all these people imitating each other, doing these things where you couldn't look more like a lemming, a slave, if you tried. It's just very shocking. But I think something that I try to talk a lot about and that gets misrepresented or misunderstood. There's this obvious, not obvious, but there's this, I guess we'll call it disclosed aspect of the mind control, social engineering, MK Ultra agenda that we have, what came out of the church committee and John Mark's book and things like that, where they give us this very limited perspective on what was happening, the Manchurian Candidate, and during the Red Scare, McCarthyism, they wanted to be able to stay one step ahead of the Russians or whatever and program assassins and couriers and stuff. But it seems to me that that's just such a tiny fraction of what the whole social, from Frankfurt School, from Tavistock to Stanford Research Institute to Laurel Canyon, whatever, the whole MK Ultra gambit. It's so much more than that. And I think a lot of that gets overlooked. And why I really enjoy, we talked about Dave McGowan earlier and the Weird Scenes book, which posits that it can't be a coincidence that all these cultural uh, influencers, for lack of a better term, in the 60s and 70s came from these very establishment career military intelligence families. I hear his work disparaged a lot because they say this was right after the war, this was going into Vietnam, everyone's family had someone in the military. But it goes way beyond that. And I think what's important about your work and things like manufacturing the deadhead is it really, really gets in much deeper to connect those dots and those people, to show that it was much more than about experimenting on a couple people, like
Yeah.
Charles Manson or something.
Oh yeah.
That article you wrote goes from Gordon Wasson to Edward Bernays, Huxley,
Right.
the Huxley family in general. These are all extremely complex things, and it's hard to, you use a term like mind control, and a lot of people that sounds so sensationalist that it just turns them off right away. And especially when you start going after sacred cows like, the Beatles or the Grateful Dead, or these things
Yeah.
that have, influenced people's whole lives and personalities.
Yeah.
It's
Very well
really.
said. Yeah. No, that's a good point. And if like McGowan's work, if it was standalone, it
Mhm,
would be pretty much irrelevant. And you
mhm,
could make the argument that this is just, bad luck circumstance, lots of military intelligence families, and who know, in other words, it
right,
wouldn't have that much weight. I think that argument really wouldn't hold that well because it's just such an overwhelming percentage,
right.
are relating back to military intelligence families. But nevertheless, they could make the argument. But then when you look at like the Grateful Dead, and then you see, well, they're all Freemasons. They're the first group to use the internet, which
Mhm.
is bizarre. I mean, why
Mhm.
would the Grateful Dead be and why would that group and their fans be the group that the internet would be tested on? And okay, and I would say uh, that one article that might be of interest to people would be the Freemason and the Rye. I wrote, and I deconstruct Catcher in the Rye, and the reason why that it's useful is that you mentioned the idea of the Manchurian Candidate, which I would say no, this is just a distraction. If you understand the book, the Catcher in the Rye is really just a story, a way of representing Freemason initiation rites.
Right.
Okay, so I show that in the article. It's very clear. It's really not even Freemasons now are texting me saying that they completely agree with that. They say, yeah, it seems indisputable. So you can then see why the book is at the assassinations. It has nothing to do with a trigger for, kind of a mind control person. The book is a warning to Freemasons to shut up and be quiet, to never mention the craft to the public. It's a promotion of its secrecy, which is why Lenin was assassinated, because in the interviews immediately before,
Right.
he'd come out and say, I don't want to be a craftsman. The CIA invented LSD. He started with making disclosures. Well, that's why Catcher in the Rye is there, because it's a way of just giving other Masons the
Look what will
instruction
happen to you.
not go public. And I one article I wrote that I think is of good influences or use here um, is I did a deconstruction of I Am the Walrus. It's very important to understand that I Am the Walrus, which seemingly is gibberish, is actually an homage to Freemason military victories, one after another after another. There's nothing in it that is gibberish. It's all, it starts out, I am you, you are me, and we were all together, right? Well, that is a line from Marching to Pretoria, which was sung by the Boers during the Boer War while they were being pursued by the Masonic British Army, right? This was the beginning of the song, and they ended up in Camp Irene, the first concentration camp, where there was horrendous casualties of women and children. Anyway, so this was how Lennon begins the song. But the next line, he goes, "See how they run like pigs from a gun." Now,
Pigs.
in literature, right, the lines tend to relate to the material above. What is he saying? Well, the song was sung by the Boers, the pigs, right? You see, it's just a pun,
Mhm.
as they were running from the gun. So then, I won't go into, because it's, there's a lot of, he jumps around to different pieces of literature, but the article is really straightforward and pretty clear that this is just an homage to Freemason military victories. Lenin could never have written this. He never expressed this kind of understanding. Someone else wrote it for him. When he was asked about it, he couldn't even answer any like simple questions concerning the poem it was based on, The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll. He didn't even know what that poem was about. So obviously he didn't write it. This was the Beatles then. This was a declaration of the control of the Beatles, and then you can then see through that. Well, McGowan's work seems a lot more coherent, doesn't it?
Mhm.
When you read Manufacturing the Deadhead, suddenly, those two pieces are linked together, and you can start to say, wait a second, all of the music industry of this era, when culture really turned dramatically, seemed to be linked back to this Masonic organization. There's enough there to at least start a real important investigation to all this. We should, as a culture, we should be investigating it. And where is that? It's
Yeah.
not happening. So it's left to you, Noah. So good luck, buddy.
Thank you. That actually brings me kind of to a big point that I wanted to talk about with you is kind of I wouldn't really call it even an overlap because it's so much beyond that, but within these circles and, their typology and like you're talking about kind of the neurolinguistic programming of songs like I Am the Walrus and the word
Yep.
pigs and things like that. Um, a lot of my generation, a lot of the musical acts or bands and stuff that we listened to were just rife with that type of coding and occulted, imagery and lyrics and stuff too. So I've noticed that, just across all the generations of music or literature and stuff like that, and a theme that seems to come up, not really a theme, but the occult influence, I guess you would call it, within these circles and the intelligence apparatus. It seems to go hand in hand with it so much so that there has to be more of an explanation for why they use that, whether you're looking back like, to the early British Freemasonry or the secrets, like the OTO and Aleister Crowley's work with British intelligence, putting out promotional things for the Germans and basically being used kind of to discredit them. Um, why is that? Why do they use this veneer, or is it a veneer? Do they really believe in these principles and, um, or is it used as some sort of, I don't know
Well,
what the right word is.
Crowley's a
Sorry.
really good place. Crowley's a great place to start. I think he's
Yeah.
sort of, kind of instrumental in that. So Crowley, his metaphysics are all rubbish. It's simply a way to create a structure that lifts people out of the European Christian traditional culture.
Hmm.
That's all it is. There is no sincerity, one iota of sincerity in any of his metaphysics. It is just to create confusion for the adherents, and also just to put these ideas into culture in a general way, so that later on the destruction of sort of the ethnicities and the Christian culture will pick up momentum, because all of these things are part of that process. So extreme metaphysics like Crowley's rubbish, it's just being given to people to slowly disassociate them from, well, basically reality, for one thing, which is what they would love to do, because, and also their traditional culture, which is the other target that they're trying to destroy. Crowley came from the same circle that produced like Helen Blavatsky. I mean, I don't know if I
Well,
wrote an article
he
called,
was highly influenced by her, and as were
yeah,
figures like Hitler.
right, exactly. I wrote an article called "The Freemason Invention of the Nazi Party," and I showed that Blavatsky was a creation of Freemasonry, and that this is well known, and that all of the concepts, the metaphysical concepts that then kind of created this blur in German culture that Nazism could be inserted into, that they had been brought about over almost a 70-year period, incrementally, so that when you get to like the Tool Society and these bizarre ideas of Arianism and the kind of German paganism, what you've done is you have disassociated the adherents of these ideas from the original culture. And so, with Blavatsky, with like the Secret Doctrine, I mean, it's like 500 pages of rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely ludicrous, but it's done to create this intellectual kind of foundation that can be pointed to then bring about the belief that, well, German paganism, we want to like bring these ideas out in the 20s and 30s and here in Germany, and that there's a intellectual rationalization for them, for the Tool Society and things like this. But all of it is rubbish in its kind of reality, but its purpose is to disassociate.
Mm-hmm.
Its purpose is to break apart and to create the kind of an intellectual platform that can be stood upon later on. People can say, well, German paganism is like a long-standing tradition. It's been around for 40 years, and now we're going to take it to a new level and really separate ourselves from historical German Christian background and enter into the world of the Nazism with all the
Mm-hmm.
metaphysics and all this stuff. So these are just well thought out and incrementally, kind of put into our culture so that over the long haul they can have this separation that they want. They are, I mean, the counterculture is another example of that.
Right.
Where these strange ideas that fly, to the moon, swim. Morrison's lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
Why write like this? What is the purpose of them? He doesn't have any vision, but it's not gibberish. It actually has a purpose. They are intent on disassociating you, or to create the idea of how hip it would be to have a new identity.
Mm-hmm.
How the old identity, the traditions, family, all of this, that's kind of not really exciting. What's exciting is this new idea
And then
of
let us provide that new identity for
and
you.
when you are there, then you get controlled further, and
Mm-hmm.
you end up with I mean, like in Woodstock, which was such a cultural catastrophe. And I mentioned I just don't think anyone could have come through that process and not have been damaged.
Mm-hmm.
you know and so this is our culture, like our food, has this toxic element in it that we just have to be aware of and try to live our life in defiance of, and with trying to come up with ways to not let it damage us. Skepticism and organic food, I would suggest, are too easy to to acquire elements.
Mm-hmm. That's a very healthy diet. Skepticism and organic food.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that the parallels between what you're talking about, the goals of some of the New Age philosophy and some of the woo-woo or whatever you want to call it, that type of stuff, are really similar goals to just the entire psychedelic counterculture as well. Which obviously we've gone in is more than established that it was manufactured by these entities and groups. Um, like psychedelics, for me, for example, as a kid, I the type of music that I was listening to and exposing myself to, the art, the books, Hunter Thompson, things like that. That was, I think, in a vacuum of that influence as a young man, I probably would have had half of the inclination to explore the things that I did. And not that I am even trying to say, that all psychedelics drugs are a bad thing. Nobody should do them. I think maybe there can be some benefits to those things, but certainly not when the person that's, the person giving them to you and then giving you the suggestions are, you know, mechanisms of the oligarchs, bands or
yeah.
music,
Well,
whatever it is.
in terms of psychedelics, no one should take them because we don't know exactly what their purpose was originally. We
Hmm.
don't know, and until we've absolutely cleaned up this kind of purpose for bringing them out, there's no way we could really know, is this something that was even possible for it to be benevolent. I mean,
Hmm.
the beginning of the psychedelic drugs, at least to an American culture, was Gordon Wasson,
Right.
and so he claimed to have found the magic mushroom, But it turns out when they found the MK Ultra pay stubs that this was actually a CIA project, and at least two of the members of the team he was with were agents.
Right.
And that Maria Sabina, who he claimed to have been a shamaness and who was like using the drug to communicate with God, she was a devout Catholic and said no, this was historically just a memory aid, and it was just blasphemous for her to think of it as something that was religious and related to religion. So Wasson was lying his head off. He was inserting the idea that this is a wonderful experience, putting that idea into culture that it could lead to a divine understanding. So this is false, but because it is false, it's obvious then what the purpose is, right? He's beginning the process to use these drugs, to make them seem hip, to try to bring about the process where they can pry away the old identity as best they can and leave people open to suggestions about the new world they want to take them into. Even though Wasson is famous, the other person who was involved in this was the guy who wrote William Burroughs.
Right.
So Burroughs has a meeting with the CIA head, goes to Mexico where he murders his wife. He has a handler who's an OSS martial arts expert. They go into the jungle in South America somewhere, and he discovers ayahuasca. And then he puts out, there's a video of him saying, I found the last shaman in the jungle. This is the end of this tradition. It's this old tradition, and ayahuasca can lead. It's the the kind of the vine of the gods. Again, it's inexplicable. The whole, what in the world is he talking about? Why is he attracted to these experiences? It doesn't make any sense. The relationship between the journey and the OSS and his meeting with the head of the CIA, none of this makes any sense as legitimate kind of just adventuring. But as part of this project, suddenly the interpretive framework becomes really clear. It's just like Wasson. He was down there. They were trying to gin up some interest in psychedelic drugs because they knew where it was all going to. It's all going to go to Woodstock. It's all going to go to a generation that has opened themselves up to psychedelics, so that then the music, the further drugs, marijuana, and the counterculture ideas are all a package, and the drugs are just helping you move toward this new world order, where it isn't going to a worker's paradise. It's going to the delta and epsilon class. You see, this is the thing you have to be aware of, is that none of this makes any sense if they're trying to really help humanity. They're not. They're trying to create the slave class and then depopulate, beyond that.
And these ideas really, really ruffle people's feathers nowadays because, I mean, if you thought that psychedelics were popular in the 60s and 70s, it's unbelievable the place that we are currently. You can buy psilocybin, type of drugs, recreational things at head shops and gas stations. You can buy them online. Ketamine therapy is as popular as ever. So people really get upset because they've invested a lot of what they believe is something that is adding to their spiritual journey, to their personality, and people don't understand that, when you're at home or at a concert or something and you're trying to induce a spiritual experience through drugs, you're not able to organize or organize peaceful dissent against a government. Nobody on acid can organize, these things. And anytime a government's promulgating something to you to this level that they are with drugs at this point, that it's not, and you have to know it's not in your interest.
We want to know the real spiritual path. It's the Socratic method. This is what is actually the highest and most beautiful form of spirituality. It's when between individuals we can use reason to help one another understand the world better and communicate that. And when you actually have an agreement on reason, you've transcended ego. You have that moment of real unification. Drugs are the other direction. And moreover, you're building strength that you can resist being attacked because you're training your mind and reason. Drugs are completely the other direction. That's why they're promoting them. And so the another example of this, it was well said. You were saying, that people will defend it because they feel they've gotten benefit from them, or it's part of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
Think about rap music. Think about where it comes from and who's
Mm-hmm.
promoting it. But then when you go to like a young African American, you go, hey, I hate to say this, but you've been controlled and you've been brought into a debased intellectual condition, not because they want you to manifest yourself. It's the opposite. It's because they want to control you right down to the last detail. And this is where you're heading when you produce this kind of music, which promotes, hypersexualism and violence, and it sort of accepts these things as hip and as just part of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
This you're moving in exactly the wrong direction. So this is one of the big problems that we have, and one of the reasons why I was so happy, when you contacted me, because I think that people who are engaged in popular culture are really just key. It isn't, if you're going to have widespread kind of revolution from this, where people start forgetting the drug craze, workers' paradise, and moving into like the Socratic world where they're looking for frameworks to explain things that are coherent, right? It's going to come through, it's going to come through people who are engaged in the popular culture. People who are sort of the kind of stuff I talk about. I mean, there might be like 500 people that will find it really interesting, or you know what I mean? But if you were able to do it through music, boy, that is just something that is really powerful. And why I think those are the people that are probably most threatened by oligarchic reaction, because I could easily imagine getting into the common culture very quickly. It's when the mandates came out, I went to people I know who are musicians, and I said, "Look, guys, uh, these vaccine mandates, these are really destructive to freedom. It's not anything other than just them setting up a slave state. You've got to get into the culture with your music. You've got to start writing songs about it." I couldn't get anybody to do it. I couldn't get, but I'm sure I'm right. This is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
So, to use an expression, Godspeed to you, brother. I hope you guys are able to get, your band into a really good place, and then use the platform to help people see that, we've got to start making some transitions culturally
Yeah.
if we're going to be around here for another generation or so.
Well, thank you. I hope so too. That's the goal. And I notice some people, it might even sound contradictory, with myself as a musician critiquing popular music at such a level, as and positing that it's a product of the mind control apparatus, that might sound contradictory, but I've seen it, just firsthand, through my childhood and high school years and everything like that. There is no other control mechanism that is as powerful as music. When you think back to high school or the young generations, what defines the different cliques and the different groups of people? It's based on, you've got the punks, the goths,
Yeah.
the metalheads, the hip hop, it's all determined by that. And so whereas people see it as this massive, this individuality that it has to it, it's the biggest tool of conformity that there is. So I think that to try to invert that and use it as something that not only awakens people to to the manipulation that is possible with it that they're unaware of, but to also then kind of use it as a call to arms to say, don't let these things define you. Don't let these things become a part of your identity, or think for yourself, question authority. It all comes back to that, where there's a lot of people think they're doing that, but the people that are telling them, those things, like a Timothy Leary, are they themselves, controlled opposition, someone who's pretending to fight against the establishment, but is really actually working for the establishment.
Yeah, I mean, I would go further and say it's the only hope we have,
Mhm.
frankly, because I don't think that sort of academics, I mean, I don't know how I would characterize myself, but I'm not an academic, but I would be lumped into that genre, I suppose.
Right.
I just don't see us having, that any kind of capacity to get at popular culture. And in my life, what I saw in terms of influence, in terms of change, was all brought about by popular culture. It
But in
was
a negative way, right? You're saying,
totally in a negative
yeah.
way. They used it against us, and they destroyed they damaged my generation dramatically, and they're continuing to use it in the same way. It was the music and the movies. Those are where the ideas came from. And so this is, there's no other avenue. I mean, I hate to put any pressure on you, but there's no other hope, really. I mean, you just think about it. Would you really think some intellectual with, some arcane like analysis of old books and stuff is really going to have that kind of influence in culture? Just
Sure.
you can be useful incrementally. You can be useful, and you can maybe provide information that those who have the capacity to enter into popular culture can then use. I mean, that would be like my greatest, hope, if that could happen. Is that those who are, and that's why I was so happy when you contacted me. I thought, this is absolutely great, because I would say the work, the stuff I do, is really useless in the long term in terms of direction culture goes. It really is only useful in the sense that it can provide details that those who can connect to popular culture can then use. Now, I don't want to characterize the situation as that bleak. I mean, tremendous strides are being made. A third of America didn't take the vaccine. This is an incredible achievement. I mean, if they'd rolled this thing out in 1950, it would have been 100%. So you can see that skepticism is growing. With the independent media, we finally have a chance to communicate with one another. We can have discussions like we're having, unimpeded by oligarchic academic control over us. We can actually just have our discussions and come up with our best understanding of the world between ourselves. And it's been 2,000 years, really, since we've had this chance. So we need to make use of it, and and we are making great strides. There is a tremendous skepticism. It's the first step. You will see skepticism just become a growing force, and at a certain point it tips over and it'll become political. We're nowhere near that moment yet, but we are moving toward it very steadily. So it's a dangerous time, because the oligarchs, they can see it perfectly well that this is happening.
That's what scares me more than anything, is because they obviously do see it and do have people that they use, like this idea of controlled opposition. You have people like, Alex Jones or things like QAnon that essentially are pandering to that demographic of skeptical people, but then leading them down this rabbit hole of, a wild goose chase, things like I don't know, adrenochrome, for example, where they put this out after WikiLeaks and things like Epstein were coming to light, where there's this really legitimate faction within the government and the oligarchy that uses the sexual violation of the filmed sexual violation of children as a form of political currency and blackmail. When this is coming to light, they put out these crazy ideas and muddy the waters, saying, Hillary Clinton is a lizard that drinks baby's blood and things like that.
Yeah.
So how do you combat that? How does one go about combating the
in the way we're doing it, by exposing the lifetime actors, the shills who are trying to take us into cul-de-sacs. I mean, the two great defining kind of truth litmus tests would be like the Federal Reserve and Zionism. I mean, I think those two are, if you have people who are, basically questioning these in a legitimate way, it's hard for me to imagine. I mean, of course, that could be co-opted too, but to date, I would say that would be, when like with RFK Jr., he makes perfect sense when he talks about the vaccines, and then when he talks about Gaza, he goes, well, the Israelis offered them money to turn they could have Mediterranean beach clubs and make money, and why did they just do that? Forgetting that, well, maybe they could have offered them like their own nation, like a two-state solution, so you can see how sophisticated they are, how they want to lead us, but lead the opposition. But there is so much awareness now of that. I think people like RFK Jr. I would say that, in order to get the trust that they need for the propaganda to work, because propaganda requires trust, they have to give you some good stuff. I mean, Alex Jones, I think, has been very useful in many ways.
Sure.
Lots of stuff he talks about is valuable. When it gets to the critical issues, then suddenly he can use the trust to turn you away from it.
Mhm.
But hopefully that, once people are used to and condition themselves to really always look for coherent interpretive frameworks, it doesn't matter what these abilities, the abilities of these shills to put us into cul-de-sacs become weaker and weaker. I think Jones is very much now a suspected person, and for the right reasons.
Mhm.
And so, and I think even RFK Jr. is now getting vetted in a very good way, because of his position on his bizarre position on the Palestinians. So, it's going to be difficult. They will throw roadblocks and distractions constantly, but the human mind, we're designed to think well. I mean, just
Mhm.
evolution produces this. And so once the skepticism as a force is inside our hearts, believe me, there's nothing they can do. It will take a while, and hopefully it won't be a bloodbath. But in the long run, there's nothing they can do. And like, you can easily see this. How many people do you know that have transitioned from sort of the normie understanding of history
Mhm.
in America to basically a skeptical position,
Quite a
that have
few.
ever gone back to the original normal position?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's not I've never met one person.
Never.
I've met thousands of people who've made the transitions. I've gone to, meetings where there have been hundreds of people, and I've talked to them, and they've talked to me about their friends and things. There's not a single person. It's
Because
just
none
not.
of it makes sense to go. You cannot
It
create a logical
doesn't.
framework that you go back to.
Exactly. Once it doesn't make sense, and your skepticism is on alert, now they got nothing to throw at you. That's why I think, honestly, I do believe we will win in the long run. I think the process is just going to be a difficult one,
Mhm.
but the process is visible, and you can interact with it through, like, your work and your websites, and hopefully, like,
Mhm.
through the music that, you know what I mean? It's like, it isn't an abstract thing, Noah. This isn't an idea. It's a process that's going on. It's real. And we're becoming, like in the vaccine. I could, when that was going on, I could see that we're the ones, the anti-vaxxers, we're the ones that have the cockiness, had the confidence, had the facts, that wanted to talk, that wanted to debate. The people who were representing the kind of the government position, they were cowed. They would use anti-vax or some kind of slur, but they couldn't engage in any discussion.
It's all
We're,
ad
we're
hominem, no actual
yeah, exactly.
dismantling.
We're the ones that can talk. We're the ones, that want to bring the discussion out to the public. So, this is an example of how clear the path to victory is. And we're on it, brother. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with minds like yours, providing laying the groundwork and the seeds and stuff, I can't tell you how impactful it was reading something like Manufacturing the Deadhead. It's one of those things that's framework shifting, and it just allows things that didn't make sense before to make sense and fully, fit in this puzzle that's you're kind of constantly putting together.
Yeah, I've written a lot of articles which are all kind of the same thing. I mean, I just take things that have struck me as being, there'd be value to bring deconstruction of these, like the Grateful Dead, or Catcher in the Rye, or I Am the Walrus. Just bring them out, but it's really all the same thing.
Hmm.
It's every one of them is kind of they're in the same. It's just trying to show that the oligarchs have a plan against us. They have a language that we can
Hmm.
understand, you
Yes.
know, and that we end up with skepticism. Beyond that, I don't have any, kind of information or plan. I mean, I just feel that if we can bring what I call the Socratic method, which is kind of a term that a lot of people may not be familiar with, but it's just reason and logic, trying to come up with an understanding, that's coherent, so that they don't run stuff like 911 or October 7th, the Hamas invasion thing. When they pull this stuff out, we have a defense against it. And what happens is, because we are able to defend against it, we become the social influence, because our reason then gets out to other people. Our reason then seeps out, and other people start understanding it. They start, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense at all. This is why we are moving toward coherency. See, we're always moving toward that. And we just need a few really popular heavy metal bands to take up the cause. And I'm telling you, brother, things will be moving in a good direction.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It also gives me hope too, because I feel like a lot of some of the tools that they use against us actually end up facilitating our awakening, for lack of a better word. When I think about the music or the cultural things that led me in a certain direction to, become curious with psychedelics or read about Aleister Crowley or stuff. Well, it's those very things that exposed me to people and ideas and events, where then I was able to have an analytical view of it and say, oh, hey, wait a minute. Crowley used to experiment. He used to put on shows and give the crowds mescaline and experiment on them and see how he can manipulate them. Well, that reminds me a lot of, what they're doing at a Woodstock or a Grateful Dead show, and then that has a
Burning
parallel
Man.
to MK Ultra. Yeah, Burning Man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this kind of worship of drugs is because it's always being done because they want to disassociate you from a personality that they think could produce the dangerous elements of family and ethnicity. Why do they hate those things so much? It's because that's where political power lies.
And
It's
even
really
outside of illegal drugs too, even like psychiatry and therapeutic drugs, if you read Ted Kaczynski's Industrial Revolution and its Consequences, he talks about how the field of psychiatry and drugs and antidepressants and stuff, they're not meant to fix or treat a problem within a person's psyche or mental state. It's meant to adjust them to change them to be more well adjusted to the system where they don't fit in and it's abnormal and inhuman. So even those things that are meant to help us, they're really not.
Of course. I mean, I would say that in the same way, I would just say, don't do psychedelics at all now, because we don't really understand what brought them about. We need to know that very clearly. Then we can maybe go forward to therapeutic aspect. But until we know that, we won't have the tools necessary to really to vet this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, psychiatry is the same thing. I mean, Freud was absolutely part of the authoritarian personality. You're neurotic unless you're sexualized in a better way. And the idea that family could be something that was just a bad idea. All of these things incrementally led to the idea that sexual restraint was a bad idea. When the fact is, sexual restraint is necessary for family, which is necessary for ethnicity. And that is why you have the Freudian, theories being brought to culture. It's not to say there isn't things within them that might be reasonable or coherent, but it is this malevolent origin that has to be understood and has to be taken out of psychiatric treatment that we're experiencing now, which still has a lot of influence from its origin. Until the origin has been exposed and the influence that this malevolent origin has in the present moment, you can't really honestly trust, well, my psychiatrist wants to put me on Ritalin, Prozac. I mean, these things are absurd in my opinion. But this is the world we live in. But I mean, personally, I just think psychiatric technique has too much malevolence and too much unknown about its origin. You can't trust where it is now. There has to be more skepticism. Now, I mean, having said this, I mean, like if you have, particularly in the present time with such damaged people, I have a personal experience with something like this. You wonder what can be done other than just give them, kind of like depressive drugs, but this is after the individual's been brought to basically an insanity, right? from that, I mean, so I don't have obviously medical advice or psychiatric. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the origins were malevolent, and we don't understand that. So before you start just accepting the present kinds of treatments and things, you might want to try to understand, well, what exactly brought about the belief that Prozac is actually therapeutic. I mean, it's so it's again, it's our world is a designed kind of artifact of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, even an example like Freud, who's kind of so beloved and put up on this pedestal in the psychiatric, psychological milieu, he was very much a part of those networks of people that were, vying for different control mechanisms, Alfred Kinsey and people like that. Freud was, horrible when you really learn about those
it's all just pseudoscience designed to give the idea that sexual restraint is neurotic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just better off, forgetting all of that restraint and becoming more sexualized being. It's a brave new world. And I mean, it's like a legitimate intellectual position, but it's also possibly a position that clever people can use to like move people into a post-ethnic, post-family world, you see. And that's really, I think, I'm afraid to say what's happened.
Yeah.
So, get healthy, think with more skepticism, and look at family with with kind of as you relate to your future, as you relate to the generations coming and after you. We are in a position now where family is really under attack, by all of the different sexualities and and the promotion of feminism. Again, it's another thing which, I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate intellectual position, but it's also so easy to weaponize.
Just like feminism was, the people involved in it.
Yeah. Anyway. All right, brother.
Hey,
My voice is about gone. Listen,
I appreciate it. Is there anywhere you want to, promote any website or anywhere people can find you and read more
if
of
you're
your
interested
stuff?
in my books, you can buy them at CaesarsMessiah.com. At Post Flaviana, so the Flavian family is, Post Flaviana has a whole bunch of articles I've written. They're all for free. I think, like the article on Catcher in the Rye is very useful for people to have. So I would recommend reading that. But everything I do is as it turns out, is just a way to try to promote skepticism. So just, don't need me. You can just see the world as it is and just go forward, trying to create some understanding of it that's coherent and not what they tell you.
Indeed. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time, Joe. It's been great to talk to
Thank
you.
you. No, it's my pleasure to be here. I hope I can come back sometime. We can have further
Absolutely.
discussion. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.